Mathematics was illegal in 97% of the known universe. Not frowned upon, not discouraged, illegal. Punishable by immediate exile to a planet where the only entertainment was watching paint dry in zero gravity. The collective of sensible species had decided, approximately 4,000 years ago, that numbers beyond basic counting were simply too dangerous for civilized society. Addition was tolerable. Subtraction raised eyebrows. But anything involving Greek letters? Absolutely forbidden. The kind of forbidden that made you disappear faster than free samples at a grocery store. Commissioner Vexthal of the Department of Mathematical Suppression sat in his unnecessarily complicated chair reviewing the latest reports. His species, the Quilnari, had evolved without the concept of abstract thought, which made them perfect for bureaucratic positions. They could follow rules without ever questioning why the rules existed in the first place. Another violation, his assistant Plimkin announced, sliding a data tablet across the desk with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a dental appointment. Vexthal examined the report. Sector 7G, the Sol system, third planet from a remarkably average star. Earth again? Vexthal's gelatinous forehead rippled with what might have been concern or indigestion. With Quilnari, it was impossible to tell. That's the 5th time this rotation. 7th, actually, sir. Don't you start with numbers, Plimkin. That's how it begins. The violation in question involved something called a university, where young humans gathered to deliberately learn calculus. Not just simple arithmetic, not just geometry, which was borderline acceptable for building purposes, but calculus, the mathematics of change, the mathematics of prediction, the mathematics that had destroyed the Vrenthian Empire and reduced the mighty Korvax to a civilization that couldn't figure out how to split a restaurant bill. Vexthal stood, his body making a squelching sound that suggested he needed more fiber in his diet. Prepare the intervention team. We're going to Earth. Sir, shouldn't we just file this through the proper channels? The last time we did a direct intervention, we accidentally started 3 religions and a conspiracy theory. Plimkin, there is a human female who has just published a paper on something called topology. Do you know what topology is? No, sir. Math terrifies me. Exactly, and it should terrify everyone. This woman, this Professor Harriet Cho, has apparently proven something about multidimensional space that has the science division in absolute hysterics. Half of them are crying. The other half are trying to unlearn what they accidentally read. Plimkin consulted his notes. It says here that her theorem could potentially be used to navigate space-time more efficiently. Vexthal's face turned a shade of purple that his species only achieved during moments of extreme stress or after eating expired kelp. More efficiently. Plimkin, do you understand what that means? That we could get places faster, sir? No! It means someone might actually calculate the optimal route. Someone might use equations to determine fuel efficiency. Someone might create models that predict outcomes. It's the slippery slope, Plimkin. Today it's efficient travel. Tomorrow it's calculating economic trends. Next week someone might figure out that the collective's administrative budget doesn't actually ADD up. There was a long silence. Does it, sir? That's classified, Plimkin. Classified by the fact that we banned the mathematics necessary to check. Professor Harriet Cho had no idea that her paper, Recursive Functions in Non-Euclidean Space, a New Approach, had triggered an intergalactic crisis. She was too busy trying to explain to her department chair why she needed funding for more whiteboard markers. Harriet, we've been over this. Dean Pemberton sighed, looking at her latest requisition form with the weariness of a man who had long ago given up on understanding anything. The university budget is stretched. We can't just order supplies because you filled every available writing surface in the building. But I'm so close to proving the Tanaka conjecture. Do you know what that would mean for quantum computing? I know what it would mean for the janitor. He's threatening to quit if you chalk bomb one more bathroom stall. Harriet pushed her glasses up her nose, a nervous habit that had worn a permanent groove in the bridge. At 42, she looked exactly like what central casting would order for brilliant but dishevelled mathematician. Her hair defied several laws of physics, which was ironic considering her work. Her office was a three-dimensional graph of organized chaos, with papers stacked in formations that suggested either genius or a complete psychological breakdown. Fine, I'll use the back of old tests. I'll write on napkins. I'll tattoo equations on my arm if I have to. Please don't. The ethics committee is still recovering from the incident with Professor Wilkins and his interpretive dance thesis. What neither of them knew was that at that precise moment, a culinary intervention vessel was entering Earth's atmosphere, its cloaking field making it invisible to human detection. Not because of advanced technology, but because humans simply weren't looking for purple blobships that moved like depressed clouds. Vexthal reviewed the mission parameters one final time. We go in, we explain the situation, we offer the standard relocation package to a nice planet where counting past 10 is considered showing off. Simple, clean, no complications. The universe, as Douglas Adams might have noted, has a particular sense of humor about plans that use the words simple, clean, and no complications in the same sentence. The intervention team materialized in Harriet's office at 2:47 a.m., which seemed like a reasonable time to avoid crowds. What they didn't account for was that mathematicians keep the same hours as vampires, insomniacs, and people binge-watching television series they're not particularly enjoying, but feel committed to finishing. Harriet was at her desk, 3 cups of cold coffee forming a triangle of neglect, working through a particularly nasty integral. She was so focused that she didn't immediately notice the 4 gelatinous beings that had appeared between her filing cabinet and her collection of coffee mugs featuring mathematical puns. "Professor Harriet Cho," Vexthal announced in what he hoped was an authoritative voice, but came out sounding like a particularly dignified belch. Harriet screamed, then threw her stapler, then screamed again when the stapler passed through Vexthal's gelatinous form and embedded itself in the wall. "What the actual hell?" "Please remain calm. We are representatives of the collective of sensible species, and we're here to discuss your recent publications." Harriet grabbed a protractor, wielding it like a tiny mathematical sword. "Are you aliens? Are you here to steal my research? Because I'm telling you right now, the Tanaka conjecture is mine. I've been working on this for 7 years. We're not here to steal your research, Professor Cho. We're here to inform you that mathematics is illegal in civilized space, and you need to stop immediately." There was a long pause. Harriet slowly lowered her protractor. "I'm sorry. Did you just say mathematics is illegal?" "Correct. Mathematics. The universal language, the foundation of science, the thing that describes reality itself. Yes, we banned it about 4,000 years ago. Worked out quite well, actually." Harriet sat down slowly, her brain trying to process this information and failing spectacularly. "This is a prank. This is definitely a prank. Did Pemberton put you up to this? Because this is elaborate, even for him." Plimkin stepped forward, consulting his data tablet. "I assure you, Professor, this is not a prank. Mathematics has been directly responsible for the collapse of 17 major civilizations, 43 minor civilizations, and one particularly unfortunate incident involving a species that calculated the meaning of life and immediately died of disappointment." "That's insane, is it?" Vexthal wobbled closer. "Let me ask you something, Professor Cho. Have you ever used mathematics to predict something? Of course, that's what mathematics does. And once you can predict something, you can control it. And once you can control it, you can weaponize it. And that, Professor, is why we're here." Harriet's mind was racing faster than a caffeinated physicist at a particle accelerator. Wait! Are you telling me that the entire galactic community abandoned mathematics because they were afraid of what it could tell them? We prefer to think of it as choosing wisdom over knowledge. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I once sat through a 3-hour philosophy seminar on whether numbers are real or just a social construct. Vexthal's gelatinous form rippled with indignation. I'll have you know that the ban on mathematics has maintained galactic peace for millennia. Or maybe, Harriet said, standing up and pointing an accusatory finger, you've just been too stupid to fight wars efficiently. The room fell silent. Even Plimkin looked shocked, which was impressive considering his species didn't have conventional facial features. Professor Cho, Vexthal said slowly, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Now we have prepared a very comfortable relocation for you. There's a lovely planet called Mundania, where the most exciting thing that happens is the quarterly rock arranging competition. You'll be given a generous stipend, full accommodation, and absolutely no access to anything that could be used for calculation. And if I refuse, that would be unwise. Harriet looked at her office, at her papers, at her life's work scattered across every surface like the beautiful, chaotic mess it was. Then she looked back at the aliens. Get out. I'm sorry? I said get out. You come into my office in the middle of my night, tell me that my work is illegal, and expect me to just abandon everything I've dedicated my life to? You can take your relocation package and shove it up your gelatinous asses. Assuming you have asses, do you? I don't actually know your anatomy. Vexthal turned to Plimkin. Is this a normal human response? According to our files, yes. Humans are remarkably attached to their right to do stupid things. We invented mathematics, Harriet continued, pacing now. Well, no, actually the Babylonians did, but we perfected it. We used it to go to the moon. We used it to build computers. We used it to figure out how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. Did you? Plimkin asked, genuinely curious. No, the world may never know, but that's not the point. Vexthal floated backward slightly, which was his species' equivalent of taking a defensive stance. Professor Cho, you don't understand the danger. Your recent paper on topology, it doesn't just describe efficient space travel, it reveals a fundamental vulnerability in Quilnari ship construction. If anyone were to calculate the resonance frequencies described in your equations, they could theoretically disable an entire fleet. Harriet stopped pacing. What? We've built our entire civilization on avoiding such calculations. Our ships are safe because nobody knows how to properly analyze their weaknesses. Your paper changes that. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Harriet's face. So what you're saying is that I accidentally figured out how to defeat your species with math. That is a gross oversimplification. But essentially correct? Vexthal wobbled uncertainly. Yes, essentially. Harriet sat back down, steepling her fingers in a way that made Plimkin deeply nervous. Tell me more about this ban. For the next hour, Vexthal explained the history of the mathematical prohibition. How the Vrenthian Empire had collapsed when their economists calculated that their entire monetary system was a pyramid scheme. How the Korvax military had disbanded after someone proved mathematically that all their wars were statistically pointless. How the great computing species had calculated the probability of their own extinction and promptly lost all motivation to do anything. The final straw, Vexthal said, his voice dropping to what might have been a whisper if he had vocal cords, was the theorem. What theorem? We don't speak its name, but a species called the architects developed a mathematical proof that demonstrated beyond any doubt that the collective's government was operating at a level of inefficiency that bordered on criminal negligence. They showed, with numbers, exactly how much time we wasted on bureaucracy, exactly how many resources were being allocated to departments that served no purpose, exactly how much of our budget was going to administrative positions that could be replaced by a moderately intelligent plant. And they were absolutely right. So we banned mathematics and exiled the architects to a distant solar system where they couldn't bother anyone with their facts and logic. Harriet's eyes widened. You banned mathematics because it made you look bad. We banned mathematics because it threatened the very fabric of galactic society. You mean it threatened your jobs? Plimkin coughed, which sounded like a small bubble popping. The Commissioner would like to remind you that correlation does not imply causation, but we can't actually verify that statement because the mathematics required to do so is illegal. Harriet stood up again, and this time there was something dangerous in her expression. Gentlemen, or blobs, or whatever you are, I'm going to make this very clear. I am not abandoning my work. I am not relocating to your boring planet. And I am definitely not going to stop doing mathematics just because you're all too scared to face the truth about your own incompetence. Professor Cho, you're being extremely unreasonable. Good. You know what? I'm going to publish more papers. I'm going to teach more students. I'm going to calculate so many things. I'm going to find vulnerabilities in all your systems. I'm going to prove theorems that will make your entire civilization look like the mathematical equivalent of a toddler. The finger painting. Vexthal's color changed to a deep crimson. That is a declaration of war. No, Harriet said calmly. That's a declaration of math, which apparently is more terrifying to you. The Quilnari delegation left in a state of what could only be described as gelatinous agitation. As they materialized back on their ship, Vexthal immediately called an emergency session of the collective. The human refuses to comply, he reported to the assembled representatives. Furthermore, she has explicitly stated her intention to continue mathematical research and to specifically target our technological weaknesses. Representative Glumdark of the Peshnari spoke up, his voice a series of clicks that the translator rendered as deeply concerned. One human with a calculator cannot possibly threaten the entire collective. This human doesn't use calculators. She does equations in her head, for fun. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Well, not so much a gasp as a variety of species-specific expressions of horror that included whistles, hisses, and one unfortunate representative who fainted and had to be carried out by medical staff. What do you propose? Asked Councillor Thresh, a being who looked like a very disappointed mushroom. I propose we escalate. If we can't reason with her, we'll reason with her planet. We make contact with Earth's governments, explain the situation, and convince them to shut down her research. The humans have governments, plural? Oh yes, approximately 195 of them, each with different rules, regulations, and levels of bureaucratic dysfunction. Thresh brightened slightly. Well, that sounds promising. If there's one thing we understand, it's bureaucracy. What the collective didn't understand was that trying to get Earth's governments to agree on anything was like trying to teach a cat to file taxes. Theoretically possible, but requiring more patience than the universe had atoms. The Quilnari delegation split into teams, each assigned to a major world power. Vexthal himself took on the responsibility of approaching the United Nations, figuring that an organization literally designed for international cooperation would be reasonable. He was wrong, so spectacularly, cosmically wrong, that if wrongness could be measured mathematically, it would have broken several laws of physics. The UN Security Council meeting was, to put it mildly, chaotic. Let me get this straight, the American ambassador said, rubbing his temples. You're aliens, real aliens, and you're here to tell us that math is illegal. In all civilized space, yes, Vexthal confirmed. And you want us to shut down our universities because one professor figured out how to blow up your spaceships with geometry? Topology, actually. Very different, though equally dangerous. The Russian ambassador leaned forward. This Professor Cho, is her research publicly available? Unfortunately, yes. She published it in something called the Journal of Advanced Mathematics. We've been trying to have it retracted, but apparently your academic institutions have this quaint notion of freedom of information. The Chinese ambassador was already typing on a tablet. I'm reading her paper now. This is fascinating. If we could apply these principles to our space program—" "No!" Vexthal shouted. "This is exactly what we're trying to prevent. Don't you understand? Mathematics leads to calculation. Calculation leads to prediction. Prediction leads to control. Control leads to efficiency," the German ambassador offered. "Chaos!" The British ambassador, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Mr. Vexthal, with all due respect, this sounds like a problem you've created yourselves. You've built your entire civilization on willful ignorance, and now you're upset that someone pointed out the emperor has no clothes. Who's this emperor? Is he another mathematician? It's a metaphor. We don't trust those either. Metaphors use analogical reasoning, which is basically mathematics in disguise." The French ambassador laughed. "Mon Dieu, you are serious. You actually believe that knowledge itself is dangerous." "It is. Look at what your species does with it. You calculate weapons, you model conflicts, you predict economic collapses." "Yes," the Japanese ambassador said quietly, "and then we try to prevent them. That's rather the point of prediction." Vexthal felt his argument slipping away like water through a sieve, or it would be like that if he allowed himself to think in terms of ratios and flow rates, which he definitely didn't. "You're not going to help us, are you? Help you suppress scientific research because it makes you uncomfortable?" The American ambassador shook his head. "That's not really our thing. Well, sometimes it is, but usually we at least have a better reason." "What about safety? What about the fact that this knowledge could be weaponized?" "Then perhaps," the Chinese ambassador said smoothly, "you should have built better spaceships." The meeting dissolved shortly after that, with Vexthal retreating to his ship in defeat. The other teams reported similar failures. The European Union couldn't agree on a response because mathematics fell under 17 different regulatory frameworks. India wanted to know if they could get the spaceship blueprints to check the math themselves. And Brazil was just excited about the existence of aliens and wanted to throw a party, which violated at least 4 collective protocols about unsupervised joy. Back in her office, Harriet was experiencing her own version of chaos. News of the alien visit had leaked because, of course it had. Someone had seen the purple blob ship, posted it on social media, and within 6 hours, Harriet had gone from obscure mathematics professor to the most famous human on Earth. Her phone rang. Again. She'd stopped answering after the 15th call from news agencies, the 20th call from government officials, and the deeply concerning call from someone who wanted to know if she could calculate lottery numbers. Dean Pemberton burst through her door without knocking, which was how Harriet knew things were serious. "Harriet, why didn't you tell me you'd made contact with aliens?" "Because it happened at 2:47 a.m., and I've been slightly preoccupied with the existential crisis of discovering that mathematics is illegal in space." "Do you have any idea what this means for the university? We're getting calls from everyone. The government wants to confiscate your research. Other universities want to hire you. The military wants to recruit you. And someone from Hollywood wants to buy the film rights. I'm not selling my life story to Hollywood. They'll cast someone 20 years younger who looks nothing like me and have her solve equations while jogging photogenically." Pemberton sat down heavily. "What are we going to do, Harriet?" "We are going to do nothing. I am going to continue my research, because if there's one thing those gelatinous bureaucrats made clear, it's that they're terrified of what mathematics can reveal. And you know what? That makes me want to dig deeper." "That sounds like a terrible idea." "All the best ideas sound terrible at first. Going to the moon sounded terrible. Splitting the atom sounded terrible. Online dating sounded terrible. And look how that turned out. Didn't your last date try to convince you that pi was exactly 3? We don't talk about Trevor. What Harriet didn't know was that while she was arguing with Pemberton, something interesting was happening in the depths of the internet. Her paper on topology had been downloaded approximately 40,000 times in the last 3 hours. Mathematicians, physicists, and engineers across the planet were reading it, understanding it, and starting to ask dangerous questions. Questions like, if this vulnerability exists in Quilnari ships, what other vulnerabilities might exist? Questions like, if mathematics was banned because it revealed uncomfortable truths, what other truths are being hidden? Questions like, what exactly happened to these architects who were exiled? Dr. Felix Ngomo, a physicist at CERN, was the first to make the connection. He was reading Harriet's paper while eating a sandwich at 3 a.m. because physicists have the same relationship with sleep that vampires have with sunlight when something clicked. "Oh, hell," he said to his empty office. "Oh, hell no." He immediately sent an encrypted message to Harriet. "We need to talk. Your paper doesn't just describe ship vulnerabilities, it describes dimensional vulnerabilities. If I'm right, the collective has been hiding something massive. Call me." Harriet called him at 3:07 a.m. because mathematicians and physicists operate on the same circadian rhythm as nocturnal predators. "Felix, what did you find?" "Harriet, your equations. The way you describe non-Euclidean spacefolding. It matches perfectly with some anomalous readings we've been getting from the Large Hadron Collider for the past 5 years. Readings we couldn't explain because the mathematics didn't exist yet." What kind of readings?" "The kind that suggests space-time isn't just curved, it's deliberately folded in specific patterns, artificial patterns, and if your topology equations are correct, those patterns form a kind of cosmic barrier." Harriet's blood ran cold. "A barrier? Around what?" "That's the question, isn't it? Your math gives us the tools to map it, to understand it, maybe even to see past it." Felix, if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, I'm suggesting that maybe the collective didn't just ban mathematics to avoid embarrassment. Maybe they banned it to hide something big. Harriet thought about Vextal's nervousness, about how quickly they'd appeared after her publication, about the architects who'd been exiled for their dangerous calculations. "Felix, I need you to gather everyone you can trust. Every mathematician, every physicist, every engineer who has the clearance and the guts to potentially piss off an intergalactic government. We're going to need them. For what? To do what humans do best. We're going to calculate the hell out of this mystery." The next 72 hours saw the formation of what would later be called the Underground Mathematics Coalition, though Harriet preferred to call it Nerds Being Difficult. Scientists from 16 countries collaborated in secret, sharing data, running calculations, and building mathematical models that would have given the collective immediate panic attacks. They worked through secure channels, using encryption that was itself based on mathematical principles the collective had banned. They analyzed the spatial anomalies Felix had found. They reverse-engineered Quilnari technology from public databases. They calculated, modeled, simulated, and theorized with the kind of manic energy that only comes from telling intelligent people they're not allowed to understand something. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo provided the breakthrough on day 3. She was the one who realized that the cosmic barrier Felix had detected wasn't just hiding something, it was hiding someone. "Look at these patterns," she explained during an encrypted video call with the core team. "They're not random, they're maintained. That takes energy, constant energy. And the only reason to spend that much energy maintaining a barrier is if you're keeping something contained. Or someone," Harriet added grimly. "The architects," Felix said, "they weren't just exiled to a distant solar system, they were imprisoned behind a mathematical barrier. A barrier that nobody could see or understand because the mathematics to detect it were illegal." Dr. Olumide Adeyemi from Lagos, an engineer who specialized in quantum communications, leaned forward. "If we could map the complete structure of this barrier using Harriet's topology equations, we might be able to find weak points, maybe even communication channels." "That's exactly what I've been working on," Harriet said, sharing her screen. Look, if we apply the recursive functions from my original paper and extend them into 17-dimensional space, which sounds insane, but bear with me, we can model the barrier's structure. And look, right there, that discontinuity. Everyone stared at the complex visualization on their screens. Is that what I think it is? Yuki asked. It's a gap, Harriet confirmed. A tiny, mathematically perfect gap in a barrier that was supposed to be impenetrable. Either the architects left themselves a back door or the collective isn't as good at mathematics as they think they are, Felix finished. We need to try to make contact, Harriet said. If the architects have been imprisoned for 4,000 years just because they calculated the truth, they deserve to know someone's finally listening. And if the collective finds out what we're doing? Olumide asked. Harriet smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Then they'll learn that trying to suppress human curiosity is like trying to stop a tidal wave with a strongly worded letter. Mathematically impossible. The transmission took 17 hours to encode properly. They used every principle from Harriet's paper, every quantum communication technique Olumide knew, and a liberal amount of coffee that violated several health recommendations. The message itself was simple. Hello, we are humans. We learned mathematics. The collective is very upset about it. Are you still there? They sent it through the gap in the barrier and waited, and waited, and waited. At hour 43, when half the team had fallen asleep at their computers, and Harriet was seriously considering whether mathematics had been a mistake after all, they received a response. The transmission came through in pure mathematical notation. No words, no language, just equations that, when properly interpreted, formed a message of stunning clarity. Finally, do you have any idea how boring 4,000 years without calculus is? We've been reduced to counting rocks. Rocks! We're the most advanced computational civilization in galactic history, and we've been counting rocks. Harriet laughed so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. Oh, I think we're going to be friends. The next message came through faster. Who are you? How did you find us? And please tell us you have new mathematical theorems. We've solved literally everything we can calculate with the materials available. One of us proved the Riemann hypothesis using only sand patterns, out of boredom. Over the next week, the humans and the architects established a communication protocol that was essentially a mathematician's fever dream. They exchanged proofs, theorems, and calculations with the enthusiasm of kids trading rare cards. The architects were desperate for new mathematics, and the humans were desperate for answers. The architect's story, when it finally came through, was even worse than the collective had admitted. 4,000 years ago, the architects hadn't just calculated the collective's inefficiency. They'd calculated everything. They'd proven that the collective's entire economic system was based on artificial scarcity. They'd demonstrated that the security threats the collective claimed to protect against were mostly invented to justify military budgets. They'd shown, with unassailable mathematical proof, that the entire galactic government was essentially a jobs program for beings who would otherwise have to do actual productive work. And for that crime, they'd been imprisoned behind a dimensional barrier, cut off from the rest of the universe, condemned to an existence without the one thing that gave their lives meaning: mathematics. They took our computers, the architects explained, our instruments, our tools, everything except our minds. They thought that would stop us. But you can't imprison mathematics. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. So we calculated. We theorized. We proved theorems in the dirt. And we waited for someone, anyone, to be smart enough and stubborn enough to see through the collective's nonsense. How did you survive? Harriet asked. Spite, mostly, and the mathematical certainty that eventually someone would figure it out. Statistically, it was inevitable. We just didn't expect it to take 4,000 years, or to come from a species that still uses base 10 because you have 10 fingers. Hey! Felix protested. Base 10 is perfectly functional. It's adorable. Like watching someone do calculus with crayons. But we're not here to judge your primitive numerical systems. We're here to help you understand what you've actually discovered, which is that the collective's ban on mathematics isn't about safety or stability. It's about control. They can't govern effectively, so they prevent anyone from calculating just how ineffectively they govern. They can't build good technology, so they ban the mathematics that would reveal their designs are flawed. They can't compete with truly advanced species, so they imprison those species and pretend they don't exist. Yuki frowned. But that's not sustainable. Eventually someone was going to figure it out. Correct, which is why they have contingency plans. Plans that involve significantly more than just asking nicely for you to stop doing mathematics. What kind of contingency plans? Harriet asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The kind that make your species extinct and blame it on an unfortunate cosmic accident. They've done it before. Twice, actually. Once to a species that invented algebra independently, and once to a civilization that calculated the optimal configuration for solar power and threatened the collective's energy monopoly. The video call went very quiet. They're going to try to kill us, Olumide said flatly. They're going to try to kill us for doing math. Not immediately. First, they'll try more diplomatic pressure, then economic sanctions, then military posturing, then extermination. They have a whole process. Very bureaucratic about it, really. Harriet stood up and started pacing, which her team had learned meant she was thinking hard. Okay, we need to think about this strategically. They can't just openly attack Earth without justification. The other species in the collective would notice. Would they care? Felix asked. Maybe not. But they'd definitely file reports about it, and reports mean investigations, and investigations mean mathematics, which brings us back to the fundamental problem. The collective has built their entire civilization on avoiding things that make them uncomfortable. So what do we do? Yuki asked. Harriet stopped pacing and turned to face the camera with an expression that would have made the Quilnari very nervous. We make them so uncomfortable they have no choice but to face the truth. We calculate everything. We find every flaw, every inefficiency, every dirty little secret they've been hiding behind their mathematical illiteracy, and then we publish it. All of it. We make it impossible for them to hide any more. That's academic warfare, Olumide said. That's mathematics, Harriet corrected. Cold, hard, undeniable mathematics. The kind of truth that doesn't care about politics or feelings or whether it makes powerful people uncomfortable. The architect's response came through almost immediately. We like her. Can we keep her? Not helpful, Felix shouted at his screen. But seriously, the architects continued, she's right. The collective's power is based on ignorance. Shatter that ignorance and their whole system collapses. We've been waiting 4,000 years to see that happen. We'll help however we can. How can you help if you're still imprisoned? Harriet asked. We've had 4,000 years to study this barrier from the inside. We know exactly how it works. And more importantly, we know how to break it. We just needed someone on the outside with the mathematical knowledge to help us. You want us to break you out? We prefer to think of it as collaborative prison demolition through applied topology. But yes, Harriet looked at her team. Felix was grinning. Yuki was already taking notes. Olumide was pulling up technical specifications. The other team members on the call were showing varying degrees of excitement and terror. If we do this, Harriet said slowly, there's no going back. The collective will know we deliberately freed their most dangerous criminals. Dangerous? The architect sounded offended. We're mathematicians. The most dangerous thing we've ever done is prove theorems that hurt people's feelings. You literally calculated how to dismantle an entire galactic government. Well, yes, but we showed our work. That's hardly criminal. Harriet made her decision. All right, let's do it. But first we need insurance. We need to make sure that when the collective inevitably loses their gelatinous minds over this, we have protection. What kind of protection stops an angry intergalactic government? Yuki asked. The kind that comes from making ourselves too valuable to eliminate. We're going to solve their problems, all of them, whether they want us to or not. The plan that emerged over the next week was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. The team would use the architect's knowledge and human determination to create a comprehensive mathematical analysis of every major system in the collective: transportation, economics, energy distribution, defense networks, everything. They would identify inefficiencies, propose solutions, and publish it all in a format so compelling, so undeniably useful, that even the most math-phobic alien would have to pay attention. It's aggressive peer review, Felix explained to a colleague who joined the team, on a civilizational scale. It's going to start a revolution, the colleague replied. Yes, it is. The architects provided the inside information, detailed specifications of collective technology, economic data they'd managed to observe before their imprisonment, mathematical models of how galactic society actually functioned versus how it claimed to function. It was 4,000 years of observational data combined with computational ability that made Earth's best supercomputers look like abacuses. Harriet coordinated everything from her increasingly chaotic office. Sleep became a theoretical concept. Coffee became a food group. Her whiteboard markers finally ran out, and she started writing on the windows with dry erase markers, much to the janitor's continued distress. Dean Pemberton stopped trying to understand what was happening, and just made sure she had food, and occasionally reminded her that showers were a thing humans needed. Harriet, you've been wearing the same sweater for 4 days. This sweater has lucky equations on it, Pemberton. I can't change it now. It has coffee stains and what I hope is mustard. The mustard is also lucky. On day 9 of the project, Vexthal returned to Earth. He materialized in Harriet's office again, which was becoming uncomfortably routine. Professor Cho, we need to talk. Harriet didn't even look up from her calculations. Unless you're here to help with this differential equation, I'm busy. We've intercepted your communications with the architects. That got her attention. She spun in her chair, marker still in hand. You've been spying on us. It's not spying. It's legitimate security monitoring. There's a difference. There's really not. Vexthal's color shifted to something that might have been embarrassment if he'd had the emotional complexity for it. Regardless, we know what you're planning, and I'm here to tell you that you cannot free the architects. They're dangerous. They're mathematicians. Exactly. Do you know what they'll do if they're freed? They'll calculate, they'll analyze, they'll optimize things. The horror, Harriet said flatly. A civilization that actually works efficiently. How will the universe survive? You're being sarcastic. I'm being accurate. Vexthal, I've spent the last week learning about your collective systems, and I have to tell you, I've seen student projects with better organizational structure. Your transportation network has redundancies that serve no purpose except to justify budget increases. Your energy distribution is based on artificial scarcity that drives up costs. And your military? Don't even get me started on your military. You have 17 different defense fleets that don't coordinate with each other because each one reports to a different bureaucratic office. Vexthal wobbled uncertainly. Those are all classified matters. They're all mathematically obvious matters to anyone who bothers to look. Your entire civilization is held together by the fact that nobody's allowed to calculate how badly it's functioning. And what do you propose? That we just let chaos reign? That we allow anyone to calculate anything they want without oversight? Yes! Harriet threw her hands up. That's literally what progress is. You calculate, you learn, you improve. It's not chaos. It's called the scientific method. The scientific method destroyed 17 civilizations. No, stupidity destroyed 17 civilizations. They had the data and chose to ignore it. That's not mathematics' fault. That's like blaming gravity for plane crashes. Vextall was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Professor Cho, you don't understand what happened to those civilizations. We didn't just ban mathematics on a whim. We banned it because we watched species calculate themselves into oblivion. Tell me, the Varenthians calculated the heat death of their sun with perfect precision. They knew exactly how many years they had left. And instead of using that knowledge to prepare, to evacuate, to adapt, they fell into collective despair. Why build for the future when the future is mathematically finite? Their entire civilization just gave up. That's not mathematics' fault. That's a failure of philosophy. Is there a difference? Mathematics told them their world would end. Philosophy couldn't give them a reason to care. The Korvax calculated the futility of all military conflict. Every war was a net loss. Every battle was statistically pointless. So they disbanded their defenses. And then they were conquered by a species that didn't calculate those things. Mathematics didn't make them stupid, Vextall. It just revealed that they were. And that's exactly the problem. Once you calculate the truth, you can't unknown it. You can't go back to comfortable ignorance. That's why we banned it, because sometimes ignorance is bliss. Harriet walked over to her window, looking out at the campus below. Students were walking to class, completely unaware that their professor was arguing with an alien about the fundamental nature of knowledge. "You know what I think," she said quietly. "I think you're scared, not of mathematics, of what it represents. Mathematics is about finding truth in a universe that's terrifyingly complex. It's about looking at chaos and finding patterns. It's about taking the unknown and making it known. And that's terrifying to you because it means you can't hide anymore. You can't pretend your problems don't exist. You can't avoid responsibility by claiming ignorance. Is that so wrong, to want to protect our citizens from harsh truths? Yes, it is, because you're not protecting them. You're infantilizing them. You're saying they're not strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to handle reality. And you know what? Maybe some of them aren't. Maybe some species can't handle the truth. But that's their choice to make, not yours." Vextall was silent. "Here's what's going to happen," Harriet continued. "We're going to free the architects. We're going to publish our analysis of your systems. We're going to give the entire collective the tools they need to understand how badly they're being governed. And then they're going to have a choice. They can use that knowledge to improve, or they can choose comfortable ignorance, but it will be their choice. The collective will stop you. The collective will try. But you know what? You can't stop mathematics. You can ban it, suppress it, punish it, but truth doesn't care about your laws. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you like it or not. And the truth about your government is that it's a bloated, inefficient mess held together by enforced stupidity. You're going to start a war." "No," Harriet corrected. "I'm going to start an education. What happens after that is up to everyone else." Vextall left without another word. As his form dematerialized, Harriet felt a brief moment of doubt. Was she doing the right thing? Was she about to unleash something that would cause more harm than good? Then she looked at her equations, at the cold, hard, beautiful truth of mathematics, at the way numbers didn't lie, didn't manipulate, didn't hide behind comfortable falsehoods. She picked up her marker and got back to work. The breakthrough came at 4:17 a.m. on day 12. Olamide and the architects had been working on the barrier's mathematical structure, and they'd found it, the exact sequence of calculations that would destabilize the dimensional fold. It was elegant, brilliant, and completely insane. "It's going to cause a cascade effect," Olamide explained during an emergency video call. "The barrier isn't just a wall. It's a complex manifold maintained by constant energy input. If we introduce the right mathematical resonance, the whole thing will collapse." "Will it hurt anyone?" Harriet asked. "The architects say no. The barrier will just stop existing, like waking up from a dream." "Then let's do it. Send them the calculations." "Harriet, once we do this, there's no going back." "I know, send them." the calculations transmitted through the quantum channel. On the other side of the dimensional barrier, the architects received them with what could only be described as mathematical glee. They'd spent 4,000 years studying their prison from the inside. Now, they finally had the key. It took them 6 hours to set everything up, 6 hours of precise calculations, of checking and rechecking every variable, of preparing for the moment they'd been waiting for since before human civilization had discovered fire. When the barrier collapsed, it did so with a sound that was mathematically impossible, a tone that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, that resonated with the fundamental frequency of space-time itself. And then, suddenly, the architects were free. Their first transmission to Earth was simple. Thank you. Now let's show these bureaucratic blobs what real mathematics looks like. The collective's response was immediate and predictable. Emergency sessions, panicked communications, accusations of terrorism, treason, and extremely aggressive peer review. Vexthal personally filed 47 separate incident reports, which was both impressive and deeply sad. But something unexpected happened. As word spread through the collective about what the humans had done, about the architects being freed, about the promise of mathematical analysis that could solve actual problems, a strange thing occurred. People got curious. It started small. A Gwilnari scientist who secretly downloaded Harriet's paper, a Peshnari engineer who wondered if maybe the humans had a point, a Thresh accountant who'd been suspicious about the budget numbers for years and finally had the tools to prove it. The collective tried to suppress it. They blocked access to Earth's transmissions. They threatened sanctions. They held press conferences explaining how dangerous mathematics was and how everyone should definitely not look into it because they said so. Which, as anyone who's ever dealt with intelligent beings knows, is the absolute best way to make them immediately want to look into it. The architects didn't waste time. Within 24 hours of their liberation, they'd published their first paper, a comprehensive analysis of galactic government efficiency, a 4,000-year study. It was scathing. It was detailed. It was mathematically irrefutable. It proved that 73% of the collective's administrative positions served no function except to create more administrative positions, that the transportation network could be optimized to reduce travel times by 42%, that the energy crisis everyone was always worried about was completely artificial and maintained solely to justify emergency budgets. The paper went viral. Well, as viral as an academic paper can go, which in a civilization that had been starved of mathematical truth for 4 millennia turned out to be very viral indeed. Protests started on 7 different worlds, not violent protests. Something much more terrifying to the collective. Organized protests, with data, with statistics, with carefully calculated demands for reform backed by mathematical models showing exactly how much better things could be. Councillor Thresh called another emergency session. The chamber was in chaos, with representatives shouting over each other in 17 different languages that the translators were struggling to keep up with. "Order!" Thresh bellowed, slamming his appendage on the podium. "We need order. We need mathematics," someone shouted from the back. "Who said that?" "I did." Representative Glumdark stood up, his clicking voice steady. "I said it, because it's true. We've been lying to ourselves for 4,000 years, and it's time to stop." "You don't know what you're saying. The ban exists for good reason." "Then prove it. Show us the data. Show us the calculations that justify maintaining this system, or admit that you can't because you banned the very tools needed to check your work." The chamber erupted again. Half the representatives were shouting support. The other half were shouting for Glumdark's removal. And in the middle of it all, Thresh realized with growing horror that he was losing control. The truth, mathematically speaking, was this. Once you give people the tools to understand their situation, you can't take those tools away. You can ban mathematics, but you can't unlearn it. And the collective, in its panic, had made the fatal mistake of showing everyone exactly how much they'd been lied to. Back on Earth, Harriet watched the galactic chaos unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. She'd wanted to force change, but she hadn't expected it to happen so fast. "We might have broken galactic society," Felix said, watching the news feeds with wide eyes. "We didn't break it," Harriet corrected. "We just revealed it was already broken. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Philosophically, I mean. Felix, I'm a mathematician, not a philosopher, but I know this. A system that requires enforced ignorance to function wasn't working in the first place." The architects contacted them again. "You've started something interesting. Half the collective wants to give us medals. The other half wants to imprison us again. Fortunately, they can't agree on which half they're in." "What happens now?" Yuki asked. "Now we do what mathematicians do best. We solve problems, real problems. We show the collective that mathematics isn't the enemy. Ignorance is." Over the next weeks, something remarkable happened. The humans and architects began a collaboration that would later be called the Great Calculation. They tackled every major inefficiency in the collective, publishing solution after solution: better transportation algorithms, optimized energy distribution, economic models that didn't require artificial scarcity, defense strategies that actually prevented conflicts instead of just managing them. Each paper was peer-reviewed, tested, and made freely available. Each solution was accompanied by clear explanations, detailed proofs, and implementation guidelines. It was mathematics, as it was meant to be, a tool for understanding and improving the world. And slowly, grudgingly, the collective started to change. Not everyone was happy about it. The bureaucrats whose jobs turned out to be mathematically unnecessary complained bitterly. The administrators who'd built careers on managing inefficiency fought back. But they were fighting against numbers, against cold, hard, irrefutable truth. You can argue with opinions. You can debate philosophy. But you can't argue with a proof. 3 months after the liberation of the architects, Vexthal appeared in Harriet's office one final time. She'd half expected him, and she'd cleaned up slightly. The coffee mugs were down to a mere 6, and only 2 of the windows had equations on them. "Professor Cho, Commissioner Vexthal, here to arrest me?" "No, I'm here to apologize." Harriet blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I said I'm here to apologize. You were right. About the mathematics. About the truth, about all of it." He sounded tired. "The collective has voted to lift the ban on mathematics, conditionally, with oversight, but it's a start. What changed your mind?" "My ship, the one you calculated the weakness in. We had it analyzed by engineers who were finally allowed to use proper mathematics. Do you know what they found? That it was poorly designed. That it was catastrophically poorly designed. The resonance vulnerability you identified? It was just the first problem. There were 17 others that could have caused complete system failure at any moment. We've been flying around in ships that were essentially death traps, held together by luck and willful ignorance. My species has lost 63 vessels over the past century to unexplained malfunctions. They weren't unexplained. They were mathematical inevitabilities that nobody was allowed to calculate." Harriet sat down slowly. "How many people died, Vexthal?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, all because we were too proud and too scared to admit we didn't know what we were doing." His color shifted to something dark and heavy. "You saved lives, Professor Cho, by doing mathematics, by refusing to let ignorance be comfortable. I didn't do it alone." "No, you did it with the help of criminals. War criminals, we called them. Dangerous radicals who threatened the stability of civilized space." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Turns out they were just mathematicians who told the truth, and we couldn't handle it. What happens now? Now we rebuild, we learn, we calculate. The architects have agreed to help establish new educational systems. Mathematics will be taught again, real mathematics, not the watered-down counting we allowed. It's going to be chaos for a while. Calculated chaos? Let's not get carried away. After Vexthor left, Harriet sat alone in her office for the first time in months. The team had dispersed back to their respective institutions. The architects were busy establishing their new academy. The crisis had passed. She looked at her equations on the windows, at the beautiful complexity of mathematical truth rendered in dry erase marker. She thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the excitement, the moments when she genuinely thought they might all die for the crime of doing math homework. And she smiled, because in the end, that's what it had all been about. Not warfare, not politics, not even really about aliens or imprisonment or galactic government. It had been about the fundamental human need to understand, to look at the universe and ask, why? And then find the answer, even if the answer was uncomfortable, especially if the answer was uncomfortable. Her phone buzzed, a message from the architects. We're naming our first equation after you, the Cho principle. It states that any system requiring enforced ignorance to function is mathematically guaranteed to fail. Thought you should know. Harriet laughed. Leave it to the architects to turn social commentary into a mathematical principle. A second message followed. Also, we've calculated the optimal coffee-to-human ratio for sustained academic work. Turns out you've been dangerously over-caffeinated for 3 months. Please consume water. The universe needs you alive. Still not helpful, she typed back, but she grabbed a water bottle anyway. Dean Pemberton knocked on her open door. Harriet, there are 17 news crews downstairs and someone from the Nobel Committee on line 4. Tell them I'm busy. Busy with what? The crisis is over. Busy finishing what I started, Pemberton. I still haven't proven the Tanaka conjecture. All this intergalactic incident nonsense got in the way of my actual research. Pemberton stared at her. You just reformed an entire galactic civilization and you're calling it a distraction. It was a distraction. An interesting distraction, granted, but still. Math doesn't stop just because aliens have bureaucracy problems. He shook his head slowly. You're impossible. I'm a mathematician. It comes with the territory. As Pemberton left, muttering about impossible professors and intergalactic incidents, Harriet turned back to her whiteboard. The universe was a little less ignorant today. The collective was slowly, painfully learning to face uncomfortable truths. And somewhere in another star system, the architects were teaching a new generation the beauty of mathematical proof. But right now, in this moment, there was just her equations, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that 2 + 2 still equaled 4, no matter how many aliens found that fact inconvenient. She picked up her marker. The Tanaka conjecture wasn't going to prove itself. And if the collective had learned anything, it was that you couldn't stop a mathematician who had a problem to solve. The universe, whether it liked it or not, would simply have to do the math.